Hi everybody, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. Today's project, our first project, is going to be a chakra pendant using this incredibly adaptable design and some 24 gauge sterling silver wire, round, half hard, and beads. Any beads you want, but mine are corresponding, as I said earlier, with the 7 major chakras. So I have my beads laid out here. You can see my itty bitty little amethyst. We're going to start at the bottom and go up. I have a cut of wire already. It's approximately 8 inches. That doesn't need to be extremely precise, but close is good. On our very first move, we're going to bend at about 5 and 3. So 3 inches on one side and 5 on the other. And I'm going to just bend it so it's at a perfect angle. This is going to become our post, and this side we're going to use to wrap. So our first bead is going to go on all the way at the bottom. It doesn't necessarily matter at this point which direction you go, just that you're going in uniformity. So the whole way up the pendant, we're going to want to do the same move each time. So I'm going to hold my bead down at my bend and pull a little bit on my round wire, my wrapping wire, a little bit more than half so that the wire gains the shape of the round bead. When I let go, you'll see what I mean. You'll have to forgive me while I figure out the best way to light as we make these little tutorial videos. So now you can see my wire, my wrapping wire, has the shape of the circle bead. So I'm going to hold the wire against the bead, hold the bead down into my bend, and take my wrapping wire and pull it around one time. You can twist the pendant to accomplish this, but one full wrap. You can see the wire is half the shape of the bead, and I've gone around my post wire one full time. At this point, I can take my chain nose plier and I'm going to work it into place just a tiny little bit so that it's nice and clean, and it sets the pace for the rest of the pendant. So straightening out my post wire. There's our first one. So now the second bead goes on. I want to try to keep these as close together as possible. So I'm actually going to pull down on the second bead when I go to wrap. I'm keeping my wrapping wire in front of my post wire, coming around and then going back and doing the same thing. So holding my bead, pinching the whole contraption down, my wrapping wire around a little more than half at first, so that I get a nice round shape matching that bead. I've just flipped it around so that it's easier for me, but I am doing uniformity. I'll show you as soon as we get this around. This time, since we're started, I can use my fingers to guide my wire into place. And on that second one, you can see it just already kind of fell in more cleanly and neatly. And you can see, again, we've mimicked the shape of the bead. So our third bead goes on. Much of the same. We're going to pull on our post wire. Make sure that we keep all of these beads as we're wrapping them as close as we can. Our wrapping wire goes in front of our post, a little more than half, and then holding everything together behind and around one full time. Just check at each juncture and make sure that your wrap has landed where you want it to. And if it's not exactly where you want it to, that's when you'll go in with your pliers and just kind of tighten it up a little bit. Much of the same for bead 4. Around the front, a little more than half. Around the back, one full time. Checking to make sure my wire is where I want it to be. When you get to these smaller beads, sometimes you're going to want to actually bend your wire a little bit further than halfway. So if you're looking here, and this would be halfway, I've gone a little bit behind the pendant. That's just going to make it easier to capture the round shape of the smaller beads as we keep going up. So we have 3 beads left and we'll do our bail. Bead on the post wire, pulling the post wire to keep all 4 beads as close, 5, as close as possible. Wrapping wire in front, turning it 1 full time, and checking to make sure that our wire has landed where we wanted to. But again, if it hasn't, then you can come in with your chain nose pliers, something really fine, and actually just grab the very edges. You want to make sure that you're on the wrapping wire and you're not putting any pressure on your post wire. And then you would just kind of really gently guide it where you want it to be. And again, see, I'm a little bit further behind than half. And that is helping me to capture, with these smaller beads, it's helping me to capture that round shape. You can do this with all the same size beads. I really like the way that it looks tapered. And in particular, since it's a chakra pendant, my intention with the design here being larger at the bottom than at the top is that it would be additional grounding and centering. So there's intention in this piece, but it can be all about design. So around the front, wrapping 1 full time. It's time for our last bead and to shape our bail. So this is the only one we're going to do a little bit differently. You can see my tiny little amethyst bead there, barely against that background, but I promise it's amethyst. We'll stick it on there. And our bail is pretty much going to start right at the top of that amethyst bead. I'll show you this finished one. And so what we're going to do here is a bend really quickly that's going to make it easier for us to keep the whole thing tight and get it together. So pushing down on all 7 beads at this point and pulling on my post wire, I will, against my finger or my nail, bend my post wire straight back. Straight back. And before I wrap the circle, because we're going to come into just wrapping the bail directly, I'm going to shape my bail at this point. So we have our straight back bend, and at about a 1/2 inch above our pendant, like I can be approximate, but I tend to land at about the same spot, approximately the same spot every time. We're going to do 1 more bend, straight back again. So it looks like a big mess now. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But what we're going to do is close our pliers, put them on the back side, the very back of everything, and wrap our post wire around our closed chain nose plier. What we're going to end up with is a bail and the 2 wires sitting pretty close on top together. And this next part is going to capture our bead, give us the round shape, and close our pendant all at the same time. So we'll push this together a little bit more just by hand. This one, I'm going to bend a little bit behind my pendant to make sure I capture the round shape of that amethyst bead, come over my amethyst bead and around the entire top, so around those top 2 wires. This is where you'll have to pull hard. You may want to stop at this juncture and squeeze that in just a tiny bit, your wrapping wire. Just a tiny bit. If we get this one perfect, or close to it, then the rest we can pretty much do by hand. It's nice and tight. Doesn't make sense yet. Our bail is still kind of going the wrong way, but just go with it here for a second. You're going to wrap your wrapping wire up towards the bend in your bail. right next to itself. If you find it's not going right next to itself, use your pliers to guide it in place. You can actually, when it starts to get short, and poke your finger, because it does feel a little like a needle at time, you can use your pliers to guide the final wires in. Let's get that around one more time. You can either do that by grabbing the end and pulling it around, or this is my favorite move. I'm hoping you can see me do it. Got the whole contraption in between my pliers in a wider part of the jaw, and I'm just taking tiny little bites as I'm moving around. I'm being very careful not to scratch or mar the wire, but my pliers are doing all the work for me right now. This one ended up being perfect, and I'm not going to need to trim the wire. But if you did need to trim the wire, you would trim it right there at the top and tuck this end so that it's nice and flush, and that if you go over it with your fingers, you can't feel it. It's not catching or snagging on anything. With super fine wire like this, it's not super fine, but with fine wire like this, you really don't need to worry about filing, because your ends are going to all get tucked in and not be visible at all. At this point, I've taken my wire that's left, the rest of my post wire, and I've moved it off to the side because this is going to become my spiral. That much wire is going to make a big spiral, so I will trim this down just a little bit. But I'm also going to check the shape of my pendant and see that I like where the wires are, where the beads are, that to me it looks straight. And at this point we can do some final shaping on our bail. So to do that, we're going to go in with our closed chain nose pliers. Just put them into the bail and twist gently with just a tiny bit of friction. And what that's going to do is kind of round it. You can see my tip right there. I just have a tiny little bend that's not round. I'm going to go in there and just make a tiny, oh so subtle squeeze. Itty bitty. And you can see that put us back into round. So now, as I said, this is going to be a big spiral if I use that much wire. So I am going to trim it down just a tiny bit, putting it against my fingers so you can see. I'm leaving a generous ½ an inch to be my spiral. We do our spiral again with our chain nose pliers. So this entire design has been done with our chain nose pliers. The spirals are tricky, but once you get them, they're so much fun. So your pliers are going to grab the very end of your wire, but make sure you actually are on the end. If you're not on the end, what you'll do is actually smush the wire instead of turning it. And that's going to make the whole thing harder on you. So you see, we have made a little bitty hook. We're going to grab the neck of our little bitty hook in between our pliers and bend that around to make a little bitty circle. If your circle is big, you can go from the edges and kind of guide it and squeeze it in a little bit. But sometimes they're kind to you and they just start out perfectly, like this one did. So we're going to continue to grab the neck and keep it flush in between the jaws of our pliers and take tiny turns. Take the neck, little turn, neck, little turn. By taking little turns and by keeping it in between the jaws of our pliers, we're also keeping it flush and flat and making sure it lies right next to itself, which is how we're going to get the best detail. I am doing extra tiny bites so that you can see what I'm doing, but as you get confident with this, you can definitely go faster. And there's our spiral. The very last thing I'm going to do is place it where I want it to be. Just kind of pinch it into place with my pliers. And there we go. Very simple, very reproducible. I go through a number of these at each show. It's one of those things that you can have at a very, very affordable price point, and you can produce a good many in a short amount of time once you get used to the design and your pliers. So good luck to you. Use it in any way that you like. Enjoy. Spread the love. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to my channel for more content later. Thank you very much.